Ethan Carter woke up with a start, his body stiff and his head pounding. His eyes fluttered open to a dimly lit room that felt more like a cage than anything else. Cold metal surrounded him on all sides, and the faint hum of machinery echoed in the background. He tried to sit up, but his muscles screamed in protest. For a moment, panic gripped him as he realized he couldn't remember how he'd gotten here, or even where here was. "Hey," came a soft voice from somewhere nearby. It was calm, almost soothing, cutting through the haze of confusion, clouding Ethan's mind. "Take it easy. You've been out for a while." Ethan turned his head slowly toward the sound. There, sitting cross-legged on the floor just a few feet away, was a woman. She looked tired but determined, her dark hair tied back into a loose ponytail. Her clothes were simple, a gray jumpsuit similar to the one Ethan found himself wearing, but there was something about her presence that made her stand out. "Where am I?" Ethan croaked, his throat dry and scratchy. His voice sounded strange, foreign even, as if it didn't belong to him anymore. The woman gave him a small, sad smile. "You're on a ship. Not ours, though." She paused, glancing around as if checking for unseen listeners before continuing. "It's theirs, the Zixians. They took us during the raid. Do you remember any of that?" Ethan shook his head, wincing at the sharp pain the movement caused. "No. Nothing." The word felt heavy on his tongue, loaded with frustration and fear. "Who are you?" "My name's Clara Dawson," she said simply. "And you're Ethan Carter. At least that's what they call you. I've been keeping an eye on you since you were brought in. You were pretty banged up when they dumped you here." Ethan frowned, trying to process what she was saying. Zixians? Raid? None of it made sense. The last thing he could recall was, well, nothing. Everything before waking up in this cell was a blur, like static on an old TV screen. He ran a hand over his face, feeling the rough stubble on his cheeks. How long had he been out? Clara seemed to notice his distress. "Don't push yourself too hard," she said gently. "Memory loss is common after what they do. Whatever drugs they gave you probably haven't worn off completely yet." "What do you mean, what they do?" Ethan asked, his voice rising, slightly despite himself. "What kind of place is this?" Clara hesitated, clearly weighing her words carefully. Finally, she sighed. "This isn't just a prison, Ethan. It's an experiment. Or at least that's what I figured out so far. The Zixians, they're not like us. They don't see humans the way we see each other. To them, we're interesting, like lab rats." Ethan stared at her, his stomach twisting into knots. Lab rats? Experiment? None of it sounded real. And yet, the cold, sterile environment around him suggested otherwise. He glanced around the cell again, taking in the smooth walls, the lack of windows, and the faint glow of light panels overhead. It was clinical, impersonal, and utterly alien. "How long have you been here?" he asked finally, his voice quieter now. "A few months," Clara replied. "Maybe longer. Time's hard to keep track of when you're stuck in a place like this. But I've learned a few things while I've been here, enough to know we can't trust them, not fully anyway." Ethan nodded slowly, absorbing her words. Despite the fog in his mind, one thing was becoming painfully clear. Whatever this place was, it wasn't safe. And if Clara was right, if they really were being used as test subjects, then their chances of getting out alive were slim. For a while, neither of them spoke. Ethan leaned back against the wall, closing his eyes and trying to steady his breathing. The dull ache in his head hadn't gone away, but it was manageable. What worried him more was the gnawing sense of helplessness creeping into his thoughts. He hated feeling powerless, especially when so much was still unknown. "So, what happens now?" he asked eventually, opening his eyes to look at Clara again. She was watching him closely, her expression unreadable. "Now," she said, leaning forward slightly, "we wait and we watch. The Zixians may think they have control over everything, but no system is perfect. There are cracks in their armor, if we're smart enough to find them." Her confidence surprised him. Despite the bleakness of their situation, Clara radiated a quiet strength that made Ethan feel less alone. Maybe it was foolish to hope, but for the first time since waking up, he allowed himself to believe that escape might actually be possible. As the hours passed, Ethan began piecing together fragments of information. Clara shared what little she knew about the Zixians, their appearance, tall, insect-like creatures with shimmering exoskeletons, their behavior, curious but detached, and their apparent fascination with humanity. According to her, the aliens viewed humans as uniquely adaptable beings, capable of thriving in situations where most species would falter. "They study us," Clara explained, her tone tinged with both awe and disgust. "They put us through tests, physical ones, mental ones, even social ones. They want to see how we react under pressure, how we solve problems, how we interact with each other. It's like they're trying to understand what makes us tick." Ethan listened intently, his mind racing with questions. Why would the Zixians care about humans? What did they hope to gain from these experiments? And most importantly, why had he been chosen? Before he could ask, however, the cell door slid open with a metallic hiss. Both Ethan and Clara tensed, instinctively moving away from the entrance. Two Zixian guards stepped inside, their elongated limbs clicking softly as they moved. Their large, multifaceted eyes scanned the room before settling on Ethan. One of them let out a series of chirps and clicks, a language incomprehensible to human ears. Clara translated nervously, "They want you to come with them." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "Why me?" "I don't know," Clara admitted. "But don't fight them. Just go along with it for now." Reluctantly, Ethan stood up, his legs trembling beneath him. The guards flanked him, their towering forms casting long shadows across the floor. As they led him out of the cell, Ethan glanced back at Clara, who gave him a reassuring nod. Whatever lay ahead, he knew he couldn't afford to lose his nerve. The corridors outside were vast and labyrinthine, filled with glowing panels and strange symbols etched into the walls. Other prisoners passed by in silence, their faces hollow and defeated. Ethan couldn't help but wonder how many of them had already given up hope. Eventually, the guard stopped in front of a large door, which slid open to reveal a brightly lit chamber. Inside, a group of Zixians stood waiting, their bodies gleaming under the harsh lights. One of them approached Ethan, holding what looked like a transparent cube filled with swirling colors. "This," Clara whispered earlier, had warned, "him is part of the testing process." Ethan swallowed hard, bracing himself for whatever came next. Whatever the Zixians wanted from him, he vowed silently to resist. Because deep down, he knew one thing for certain: he was still human, and that meant he had something worth fighting for. Ethan stood frozen in the center of the brightly lit chamber, his eyes darting between the Zixians surrounding him. Their insect-like forms loomed over him, their multifaceted eyes reflecting the cold light above. The tallest one, the one holding the glowing cube, moved closer, its movement smooth and deliberate. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine as it extended a limb toward him, the cube hovering inches from his face. What do you want?" Ethan stammered, though he knew they wouldn't understand him. He glanced at the other Zixians, searching for any sign of emotion or intent, but their expressions remained unreadable. They weren't angry or hostile. They were curious, like scientists observing a lab rat. The Zixian tilted its head slightly, studying Ethan with an intensity that made him feel exposed. Then, without warning, the cube emitted a soft hum and a beam of light shot out, enveloping Ethan's body. For a brief moment, he thought he might scream, but instead, he felt calm. The pain in his head faded, replaced by a strange warmth spreading through his limbs. His vision blurred, and when it cleared, he found himself standing in a completely different place. The chamber was gone. In its place was a vast, desolate landscape bathed in eerie orange light. Jagged rocks jutted out of the ground like broken teeth, and a thick mist swirled around his feet. Ethan stumbled backward, his heart pounding. Was this real? Or was it some kind of illusion? "This is part of the test," a voice said behind him. Ethan spun around to see Clara standing there, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She looked just as confused as he felt, but there was also a hint of determination in her eyes. "Clara? What are you doing here?" Ethan asked, relief washing over him at the sight of a familiar face. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I'm guessing they brought me here to observe how we interact under stress. This isn't the first time they've done something like this." Ethan frowned, glancing around at the barren terrain. "So what? We're supposed to survive this place or something?" "Maybe," Clara replied. "Or maybe they just want to see how we solve problems together. Either way, we need to stay sharp. These tests aren't random, they're designed to push us to our limits." Before Ethan could respond, the ground beneath them trembled violently. A deep rumble echoed through the air, followed by the sound of cracking stone. Out of the corner of his eye, Ethan spotted movement. A shadowy figure emerging from the mist. It was humanoid in shape but grotesquely distorted, with elongated limbs and glowing red eyes. Its mouth opened impossibly wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth. "What the hell is that?" Ethan whispered, taking a step back. Clara's expression hardened. "Another test. Stay close to me." The creature lunged forward with terrifying speed, its claws slicing through the air where Ethan had been standing moments before. He barely managed to dodge, stumbling over a rock as the thing turned its attention to him. Adrenaline surged through his veins, sharpening his senses. Without thinking, he grabbed a nearby chunk of broken stone and hurled it at the creature. It struck the monster squarely in the chest, causing it to stagger. "Nice throw," Clara shouted, pulling a small metallic object from her pocket. It looked like a pen, but when she pressed a button on the side, it extended into a makeshift spear. "Let's finish this." Together, they circled the creature, trying to find an opening. Ethan noticed that its movements were erratic, almost mechanical, as if it wasn't fully aware of its surroundings. That gave him an idea. "Distract it," he called out to Clara. "I'll try to get behind it." Clara nodded and charged forward, jabbing at the creature with her spear. It roared in anger, swinging wildly at her. While it was focused on Clara, Ethan crept around to its flank, looking for a weak spot. He spotted a faint seam running along its back, likely a joint connecting two sections of its exoskeleton. If he could hit it hard enough, maybe he could disable the thing. Taking a deep breath, Ethan sprinted forward, leaping onto the creature's back. He drove the shard of rock into the seam with all his strength. The creature let out an ear-splitting screech, thrashing violently as it tried to shake him off. Ethan held on tight, gritting his teeth against the pain in his arms. Finally, with one last desperate shove, the rock pierced through the seam and the creature collapsed to the ground, lifeless. For a moment, neither Ethan nor Clara moved. They simply stared at the fallen beast, catching their breath. Then, slowly, the world around them began to dissolve, the orange sky fading into darkness until they were back in the chamber with the Zixians. "Well done," one of the aliens chirped, its tone impossible to interpret. Ethan couldn't tell if it was praise or mockery. Either way, he didn't care. All he wanted was to get back to the cell, to safety. As the guards escorted them away, Clara leaned close to Ethan. "You handled that well," she said quietly. "Most people freeze up during their first trial." Ethan shrugged, still shaken. "I didn't have much choice, but thanks for having my back." Clara smiled faintly. "We're in this together, remember?" Back in the cell, Ethan sank onto the floor, his body aching from the ordeal. Clara sat beside him, handing him a small container of water she'd managed to smuggle from the testing area. He drank greedily, feeling the cool liquid soothe his parched throat. "That was insane," Ethan muttered after a while. "Do those things happen often?" "More than you'd think," Clara replied. "The Zixians love throwing curveballs. Sometimes it's physical challenges, sometimes it's puzzles or simulations. It depends on what they're studying." "And you've been through all of that?" Ethan asked, incredulous. "Not all of it," Clara admitted, "but enough to recognize patterns. Like I said earlier, they're always watching." Everything we do feeds into their research. Ethan rubbed his temples, trying to make sense of it all. Why do they even care? Why go through all this trouble just to study us? Clara hesitated, choosing her words carefully. I don't know for sure, but I think it's because they see potential in us. Humans are adaptable, resourceful, we can survive almost anything. To the Zixians, that makes us unique, maybe even valuable. Ethan frowned. Valuable enough to keep locked up like animals? Clara sighed. It's not about kindness or cruelty. To them, we're not people. We're subjects, tools. They don't see us the way we see ourselves. The weight of her words settled over Ethan like a heavy blanket. He hated the idea of being reduced to nothing more than data in some alien experiment. But at the same time, he couldn't deny the truth in what Clara was saying. The Zixians weren't evil, they were indifferent. And that somehow made it worse. Over the next few days, Ethan and Clara fell into a routine. They shared stories, piecing together fragments of their lives before captivity. Clara had been a software engineer back on Earth working on advanced AI systems. She spoke fondly of her work, her eyes lighting up as she described the thrill of solving complex problems. Ethan, on the other hand, struggled to recall much about his past. The memory loss was frustrating, but Clara assured him it would come back in time. In between conversations, Clara worked tirelessly on her secret project. Using scraps of metal and wires scavenged from the testing areas, she was building a device capable of interfacing with the ship's surveillance system. Her goal was simple: to gain access to the Zixians' internal network and uncover information about their plans. It's risky, she admitted one evening as she tinkered with the device. If they catch me, I'm dead. But if I succeed, we might finally have a chance to fight back. Ethan watched her work, impressed by her determination. You really think you can pull it off? I have to, Clara said firmly, because if I don't, none of us will ever leave this place. As the days passed, tensions among the other prisoners began to rise. Food rations grew scarce, and tempers flared. One day, a man named Ryan Miller, a tall, broad-shouldered guy with a short temper, accused Ethan of hoarding supplies. The accusation came out of nowhere, catching Ethan off guard. You think you're better than the rest of us? Ryan snarled, stepping into Ethan's personal space. Hiding food, while the rest of us starve. I haven't taken anything, Ethan replied, keeping his voice steady despite the knot forming in his stomach. You're welcome to check my stuff if you don't believe me. Ryan sneered. Don't play innocent with me. Everyone knows. You've been cozying up to Clara, probably trading favors for extra rations. That's enough, Clara interjected, stepping between them. Ethan hasn't done anything wrong. If you've got a problem, take it up with the Zixians, not him. Ryan glared at her but backed off, muttering under his breath. Ethan let out a shaky breath once the confrontation ended, grateful for Clara's intervention. Still, the incident left a sour taste in his mouth. Trust was fragile in a place like this, and accusations like Ryan's only made things worse. Despite the growing tension, Ethan continued to focus on survival. He trained himself to stay alert, learning to anticipate the Zixians' tests and adapt quickly to new challenges. With Clara's guidance, he grew stronger, not just physically but mentally. Slowly but surely, he began to feel like less of a victim and more of a fighter. One night, as they lay awake in the dim light of their cell, Clara turned to Ethan with a thoughtful expression. You know, she said softly, you remind me of someone. Oh yeah? Ethan asked, raising an eyebrow. Who? My brother, Clara replied. He was brave too, always willing to stand up for what was right no matter the cost. The days blurred together in the cramped confines of the cell, each one marked by the same monotonous routine. Ethan and Clara spent their time planning, strategizing, and preparing for whatever came next. But as tensions among the other prisoners continued to rise, it became clear that survival wasn't just about outsmarting the Zixians. It was also about navigating the fragile web of trust within their own group. Ryan Miller had become a constant source of trouble. His accusations against Ethan hadn't been forgotten, and he made no effort to hide his resentment. He paced the cell like a caged animal, muttering under his breath whenever Ethan or Clara tried to speak with the others. It was only a matter of time before his frustration boiled over into something more dangerous. One evening, as the group gathered around the dim light of the cell's single panel, Ryan finally snapped. "You two think you're so special," he growled, glaring at Ethan and Clara. "Always whispering your little secrets, acting like you're better than everyone else." Ethan clenched his fists but forced himself to stay calm. "We're not trying to exclude anyone, Ryan. We're just trying to survive." "Survive?" Ryan spat. "Is that what you call it? While the rest of us are starving, you two are hoarding food and making plans we don't even know about. How do we know you're not working with them?" The accusation hit like a punch to the gut. Ethan opened his mouth to protest, but Clara stepped in before he could say anything. "That's ridiculous," she said firmly, her voice cutting through the tension. "If we were working with the Zixians, why would we still be stuck here? Why would we risk our lives helping you?" Ryan hesitated, clearly searching for a comeback. But before he could respond, a young girl named Lily Harper spoke up. She was quiet and shy, rarely saying more than a few words at a time, but now her voice rang out with surprising clarity. "They're telling the truth," she said softly. "I've seen them share their food. I've seen them protect us when the tests got bad. They're not lying." For a moment, the room fell silent. Ryan's face reddened, embarrassment mixing with anger. He shot Lily a venomous look but didn't argue further. Instead, he stormed off to the far corner of the cell, sulking in silence. After the confrontation, Ethan pulled Clara aside. "Do you think he'll cause more problems?" he asked quietly. "He already is," Clara replied, glancing toward Ryan. "But we can't let him distract us. If anything, this proves how important it is to stick together. Divided, we're easy targets for both the Zixians and ourselves." Ethan nodded, though he couldn't shake the unease gnawing at him. Trust was a fragile thing, especially in a place like this. One wrong move could shatter it completely. Later that night, while most of the prisoners slept, Clara worked on her device. She sat cross-legged on the floor, her fingers moving deftly over the small contraption. Ethan watched her from across the cell, marveling at her focus. Despite everything they'd been through, she never seemed to lose sight of their goal. "How's it coming?" he whispered, careful not to wake the others. "It's close," Clara replied, her eyes still fixed on the device. "A few more adjustments and I should be able to tap into the surveillance system. Once I do, we'll have access to the ship's schematics, and maybe even find a way out." Ethan felt a flicker of hope, but it was quickly tempered by doubt. "And if something goes wrong, what if they catch you?" Clara paused, setting the device down gently. "Then we'll deal with it. But we can't keep sitting here waiting for things to get better. We need to take risks if we want to survive." Her determination inspired him, but it also scared him. He didn't want to lose her, not after everything they'd been through together. Still, he knew she was right. Sitting idle wasn't an option. The next day, Clara announced that her device was ready. She gathered the group, explaining her plan in simple terms. "This device will let me hack into the ship's systems," she said, holding up the small gadget. "It won't solve all our problems, but it'll give us a chance to fight back. If I succeed, we might be able to disable parts of the ship or at least create enough chaos to make an escape possible." The prisoners listened intently, their faces a mix of hope and skepticism. Some nodded in agreement, while others exchanged wary glances. Ryan, predictably, was the first to object. "And what happens if you fail?" he demanded. "What if the Zixians decide to punish us for your little stunt?" "I'll take full responsibility," Clara said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "But staying here isn't an option either. We're running out of time and resources. If we don't act soon, none of us will make it out alive." To Ethan's relief, Lily stepped forward again. "I believe in you, Clara," she said, her voice steady despite her obvious fear. "If anyone can pull this off, it's you." Others began to murmur their support, and even Ryan reluctantly agreed to go along with the plan. With the group united, at least for now, Clara prepared to put her device to the test. That night, Clara and Ethan snuck out of the cell under the cover of darkness. The Zixians' patrols were predictable, their movements mechanical and precise. Using Clara's knowledge of their patterns, they managed to slip past the guards and reach a maintenance hatch leading to the ship's lower levels. "This is it," Clara whispered, attaching her device to a control panel near the hatch. Her hands moved quickly, her fingers flying over the tiny keyboard embedded in the gadget. Within moments, the screen lit up with streams of alien text. "What does it say?" Ethan asked, peering over her shoulder. "I'm translating it now," Clara replied, her brow furrowed in concentration. "It looks like, yes, I've got access to the surveillance feeds. Now I just need to locate the main control hub." She worked. Ethan kept watch, his heart pounding in his chest. Every sound, the hum of machinery, the distant click of Zixian claws, set his nerves on edge. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Suddenly, the device emitted a soft beep. Clara's eyes widened. "Got it," she whispered. "The control hub is 3 decks above us. If we can reach it, we can disable parts of the ship's security system." Before they could celebrate, however, the lights flickered, plunging the corridor into darkness. Ethan grabbed Clara's arm, pulling her behind a stack of crates as heavy footsteps echoed nearby. Through the shadows, they could see the faint outline of a Zixian guard approaching, its glowing eyes scanning the area. "They must have detected the breach," Clara whispered, her voice barely audible. "We need to move. Now." Ethan nodded, gripping her hand tightly as they slipped away from the guard. Their path was fraught with danger, every step bringing them closer to discovery. But they pressed on, driven by desperation and the hope of freedom. When they finally reached the control hub, Clara wasted no time. She connected her device to the main terminal, bypassing layers of alien encryption with practiced ease. The screens around them lit up, displaying maps of the ship and live feeds from dozens of cameras. "We've got access," Clara said, a triumphant smile spreading across her face. "Now comes the hard part." "What's the plan?" Ethan asked, his voice tinged with urgency. Clara hesitated, weighing their options. "We trigger a system-wide malfunction," she said finally. "Disable the power grid, disrupt communications. It'll buy us time to organize an escape." "And if it doesn't work?" Ethan asked, though he already knew the answer. "Then, we'll fight our way out," Clara replied, her expression grim but resolute. "Whatever it takes." With a deep breath, she activated the program. The ship shuddered violently as alarms blared throughout the corridors. Lights flickered and panels sparked, throwing the Zixians into confusion. For the first time since their capture, Ethan felt a glimmer of control, a sense that they were no longer powerless. But their victory was short-lived. As they turned to leave, a chilling voice echoed behind them. "You think you can defy us?" Ethan spun around to see a Zixian standing in the doorway, its exoskeleton gleaming in the dim light. It raised a claw-like appendage pointing directly at Clara. "Your actions will not go unpunished." Clara stepped forward, shielding Ethan with her body. "Try us," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. The Zixian tilted, its head studying her with unnerving intensity. Then, without warning, it lunged forward, its movements impossibly fast. Ethan reacted instinctively, grabbing a loose piece of metal and swinging it at the creature. The blow struck true, forcing the Zixian to stagger back. "Run!" Clara shouted, pulling Ethan toward the exit. They sprinted through the chaotic corridors, dodging falling debris and panicked guards. Behind them, the Zixian gave chase, its angry chirps reverberating through the air. Ethan's lungs burned and his legs screamed in protest, but he pushed himself harder than ever before. They couldn't afford to slow down. Not now. Finally, they reached the safety of the cell, slamming the door shut behind them. The prisoners inside looked up in shock, their faces pale with fear. Before anyone could ask what had happened, Clara held up her device, her chest heaving as she caught her breath. "It's done," she said, her voice trembling with exhaustion and triumph. "The system's down. We've got a window. Small, but enough to make a move." Ethan locked eyes with her, pride swelling in his chest. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The cell buzzed with nervous energy as Clara and Ethan relayed their plan to the group. The prisoners listened intently, their faces a mix of hope and fear. Outside, alarms continued to blare, and the ship's systems flickered unpredictably. It was chaos. And for the first time since their capture, it felt like chaos they could control. "We've got one shot at this," Clara said, her voice firm despite the exhaustion etched into her features. Clara disabled parts of the ship's security system, but it won't last long. Once the Zixians regain control, they'll come for us. Hard. If we're going to escape, we need to move now. Ethan stood beside her, scanning the room. Some of the prisoners nodded in agreement, while others exchanged uneasy glances. Lily Harper clutched a scrap of fabric tightly in her hands, her wide eyes fixed on Clara. Ryan Miller, however, crossed his arms and leaned against the wall, his expression unreadable. "So what's the plan?" Ryan asked, his tone laced with skepticism. "We just waltz out of here, take on an entire alien crew, and magically find our way back to Earth?" "No," Ethan replied sharply, stepping forward. "We fight smart, not reckless. Clara's device gave us access to the ship's schematics. We know where the hangar bay is, and more importantly, we know how to get there without running into too many patrols." Ryan smirked. "And what happens when we do run into patrols? You think your little toy will save us then?" Before Ethan could respond, Clara cut in. "This isn't about toys or plans, it's about survival. If you don't want to help, fine, but don't drag the rest of us down with your negativity." Ryan opened his mouth to argue, but something in Clara's gaze made him pause. He glanced around the room, meeting the stares of the other prisoners. Slowly, he uncrossed his arms and shrugged. "Fine, I'm in. But if this goes south, don't say I didn't warn you." With the group finally united, albeit reluctantly, Clara outlined the details. They would split into two teams, one led by Ethan, focused on clearing a path to the hangar, and another led by Clara, tasked with securing a shuttle. The goal was simple: reach the hangar, disable any remaining defenses, and launch a ship before the Zixians could stop them. As they prepared to leave, Ethan pulled Clara aside. "Are you sure about this?" he asked quietly. "Splitting up feels risky." "It's necessary," Clara replied, adjusting the straps of her makeshift toolkit. "If we stay together, we'll be too slow. Besides, someone needs to keep the group focused, and that's you." Ethan hesitated, searching her face for any sign of doubt, but all he saw was determination. "All right," he said finally. "Just be careful." Clara smiled faintly, patting him on the shoulder. "You too." The corridors outside were eerily quiet, the hum of machinery replaced by an unsettling stillness. Ethan led his team cautiously, keeping close to the walls as they navigated the labyrinthine passages. Every shadow seemed to shift, every sound amplified tenfold. The Zixians' absence was almost worse than their presence. It left too much room for uncertainty. "Stay sharp," Ethan whispered, gripping a length of pipe he'd scavenged earlier. "They're waiting for us somewhere." Behind him, Lily tightened her grip on a shard of broken glass, her small frame tense but resolute. She hadn't spoken much since joining the group, but her actions spoke volumes. Despite her youth, she refused to be left behind. After what felt like hours, they reached a junction marked on Clara's map as a potential choke point. Sure enough, as they rounded the corner, they were met with resistance. 3 Zixian guards blocked their path, their elongated limbs clicking softly as they moved into position. "Everyone stay calm," Ethan murmured, raising his makeshift weapon. "We can do this." The first Zixian lunged forward, its claws slicing through the air. Ethan sidestepped, swinging the pipe with all his strength. The blow connected, sending the creature stumbling backward. Seizing the opportunity, Lily darted forward, slashing at its legs with her shard of glass. The Zixian let out a high-pitched screech, collapsing to the ground. But the victory was short-lived. The remaining guards closed in, forcing the group to scatter. Ethan fought desperately, his movements fueled by adrenaline. He managed to knock one guard off balance, giving Lily enough time to strike again. Meanwhile, Another prisoner, a wiry man named Jake, used a piece of debris to incapacitate the third Zixian. When the dust settled, the group regrouped, panting heavily. Ethan surveyed the scene, his chest heaving. "Good work," he said, offering Lily a reassuring nod. "Let's keep moving." Meanwhile, Clara's team faced challenges of their own. The route to the hangar required them to pass through a series of maintenance tunnels, narrow and poorly lit. As they crept along, Clara kept one eye on her device, monitoring the ship's systems for signs of activity. "This is taking too long," Ryan muttered, his frustration palpable. "At this rate, the Zixians will catch up to us before we even reach the hangar." "We're doing the best we can," Clara snapped, her patience wearing thin. "If you have a better idea, feel free to share it." Ryan clenched his jaw but said nothing. Instead, he quickened his pace, pushing ahead of the group. Clara watched him go, her stomach sinking with unease. Something about his behavior didn't sit right. Sure enough, trouble came sooner than expected. As they approached the hangar entrance, Ryan suddenly stopped, holding up a hand to signal the others. "Wait," he said, his voice low. "There's something you should see." Clara frowned, stepping forward cautiously. "What is it?" Ryan turned to face her, a smug grin spreading across his face. "It's called leverage." Before anyone could react, he pressed a button on his wrist, a device he'd been hiding since the start. The doors to the hangar slid open, revealing a squad of Zixian guards waiting inside. "You betrayed us," Clara whispered, her voice trembling with anger and disbelief. "I did what I had to do," Ryan replied, shrugging. "The Zixians promised me a deal. If I helped them, they'd let me go free. Don't blame me for looking out for myself." Clara's mind raced, searching for a way out of the trap. But the Zixians were already advancing, their weapons trained on the group. For a moment, it seemed like all hope was lost. Then, from behind the guards, a familiar figure emerged. It was Ethan, leading his team through a side entrance. With a fierce yell, he charged forward, catching the Zixians off guard. Chaos erupted as both groups clashed, the humans fighting with everything they had. In the confusion, Clara spotted an opening. Grabbing a discarded tool, she hurled it at Ryan, striking him squarely in the head. He crumpled to the ground, unconscious. Without hesitation, she sprinted toward the nearest shuttle, activating the controls with her device. "Get in!" she shouted, waving the others over. One by one, they piled into the craft, narrowly avoiding the Zixians' counterattack. As the shuttle lifted off, Ethan joined Clara in the cockpit, his face streaked with sweat and grime. "Did we make it?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "For now," Clara replied, her hands flying over the controls. "But we're not safe yet. Not until we're far away from this ship." Through the viewport, they watched as the alien vessel grew smaller and smaller, fading into the vast expanse of space. For the first time in months, they allowed themselves to breathe. The shuttle shuddered as it broke free from the Zixian ship's gravitational pull, its engines straining against the weight of escape. Inside, the air was thick with tension and exhaustion. Clara sat in the pilot's seat, her fingers flying over the controls as she guided the craft away from danger. Ethan stood behind her, gripping the back of her chair for support as he scanned the viewport for any sign of pursuit. "Are they following us?" he asked, his voice tight with worry. Clara shook her head, her gaze fixed on the screens. "Not yet, but they will. Those ships are faster than this one. We've got a head start, but it won't last long." Ethan clenched his jaw, staring out at the endless void of space. The Zixian vessel loomed in the distance, its sleek design looking more menacing now than ever. For all their planning and effort, they were still far from safe. Behind them, the other survivors huddled together, some nursing injuries, others simply trying to catch their breath. Lily sat near the back, clutching her knees to her chest, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and awe. Jake leaned against the wall, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead, but he didn't complain. None of them did. They had made it this far, and none of them wanted to give up now. "We need a plan," Ethan said, turning back to Clara. "If they catch us, we're done." Clara nodded, her expression grim. "I know. This shuttle isn't built for long-distance travel. It's meant..." for short trips between ships or planets. If we don't find somewhere to land soon, we'll run out of fuel. Ethan frowned. Any ideas? Clara hesitated, glancing at the navigation screen. There's a planet not too far from here. It's uninhabited, or at least it was when. The Zixians mapped it, but it might have resources we can use. Enough to repair the shuttle or even build something new. It's risky, Ethan said, crossing his arms. What if it's a trap? What if the Zixians already know about it? We don't have a choice, Clara replied, her tone firm. Staying here means getting caught. At least on the planet, we'll have a fighting chance. Ethan let out a slow breath, knowing she was right. All right, let's do it. The descent to the planet was anything but smooth. The shuttle's systems groaned under the strain as they entered the atmosphere, and the cabin temperature began to rise. Alarms blared, warning of overheating thrusters and failing stabilizers. Clara fought to keep the craft steady, her knuckles white as she gripped the controls. Hold on, she shouted as the shuttle rocked violently. Outside, the planet's surface came into view, a barren wasteland of jagged rocks and swirling dust storms. It wasn't welcoming, but it was their only option. With a jarring thud, the shuttle landed, skidding across the uneven terrain before finally coming to a stop. For a moment, there was silence, broken only by the sound of everyone exhaling in relief. We made it, Lily whispered, her voice barely audible. For now, Clara said, unbuckling herself from the pilot's seat. But we're not out of the woods yet. Stepping outside, the group was immediately hit by a biting wind that carried grit and sand. The sky above was a dull orange, casting an eerie glow over the landscape. In the distance, towering rock formations rose like broken spires, their jagged edges cutting into the horizon. This place feels wrong, Jake muttered, shielding his face from the wind. It's not exactly paradise, Clara agreed, scanning the area, but it's better than being on that ship. Their first priority was finding shelter. The shuttle's hull was already showing signs of damage, and staying out in the open would leave them vulnerable to both the elements and potential Zixian patrols. After some searching, they discovered a cave system carved into one of the larger rock formations. It wasn't perfect, but it offered protection from the wind and enough space to set up camp. As night fell, the temperature dropped sharply, forcing the group to huddle together for warmth. Clara worked tirelessly to assess the shuttle's condition, using what little equipment they had salvaged to make repairs. Ethan helped where he could, fetching tools and holding parts steady while she worked. Despite the cold and the uncertainty, there was a sense of camaraderie among them, a shared determination to survive. But tensions still simmered beneath the surface. Ryan's betrayal weighed heavily on everyone's minds, especially Clara's. She couldn't shake the image of him standing there smug and unrepentant as the Zixians closed in. It wasn't just the betrayal itself that bothered her. It was the reminder that trust was a fragile thing, easily broken. You okay? Ethan asked, noticing the distant look in her eyes. Clara forced a smile. Yeah, just thinking. About Ryan? Ethan guessed. She sighed, nodding. He wasn't the first person I trusted who turned their back on me, and he probably won't be the last. But it doesn't make it hurt any less. Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder. We'll get through this, together. Clara looked at him, gratitude shining in her eyes. Thanks, Ethan. The next morning, the group split into teams to scavenge for supplies. Clara led one team to explore the surrounding area, while Ethan stayed behind to continue working on the shuttle. As they ventured further from the cave, Clara kept a close eye on the horizon, watching for any sign of movement. The planet seemed deserted, but appearances could be deceiving. It wasn't long before they stumbled upon something unexpected, a derelict spacecraft half buried in the sand. Its hull was scorched and battered, clearly having been abandoned for years. But inside they found something remarkable, a cache of tools, spare parts, and even a few containers of food. This is incredible, Clara said, her voice tinged with excitement. With these supplies, we might actually stand a chance. But as they began loading the items onto a makeshift sled, a low rumble echoed through the air. The ground trembled, and a cloud of dust rose in the distance. Something was moving. Something. "Big, get back to the cave," Clara shouted, ushering the others toward safety. They ran as fast as they could, dragging the sled behind them, but the rumbling grew louder, closer. When they reached the cave, Ethan was waiting, his face pale with concern. "What was that?" "I don't know," Clara admitted, her heart racing. "But whatever it is, it's not friendly." As night fell again, the group gathered around a small fire, their nerves stretched thin. The rumbling had stopped, but none of them felt safe. Outside, the wind howled like a living thing, carrying whispers of danger. "We can't stay here forever," Ethan said, breaking the silence. "If those Zixians come looking for us, this planet won't protect us." "I know," Clara replied, staring into the flames. "But we're not ready yet. We need more time." Time, however, was a luxury they might not have. Somewhere out there, the Zixians were hunting them, and they wouldn't stop until they found what they were looking for. The next morning brought no relief. The wind howled louder than before, and the orange sky seemed darker, as if the planet itself was preparing for something ominous. Clara and Ethan gathered the group to discuss their options. Everyone was tired, hungry and scared, but they knew giving up wasn't an option. "We need to decide what we're doing next," Clara said, her voice steady despite the exhaustion etched on her face. "We can't stay here forever, but we also can't leave until we fix the shuttle." Ethan nodded. "And if the Zixians show up before we're ready?" "Then we fight," Clara replied simply. "But fighting won't be enough unless we have a plan." The group fell silent, each person lost in their own thoughts. Lily sat quietly, her hands wrapped around a small piece of metal she'd picked up during their scavenging trip. Jake stared at the ground, his jaw clenched. Even those who rarely spoke seemed to feel the weight of the moment pressing down on them. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "If we're going to make it out of this, we need to work together. No more secrets, no more doubts. We stick by each other, or we don't make it at all." One by one, the others nodded. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Later that day, Clara and Ethan returned to the derelict spacecraft to gather more supplies. They worked quickly, loading tools and parts onto the sled while keeping a wary eye on the horizon. The rumbling from the previous day hadn't returned, but neither of them trusted the quiet. Something about this planet felt alive, as if it were watching them. As they prepared to leave, Ethan noticed a strange symbol etched into the side of the ship, a series of lines and curves that didn't match any human or Zixian design. He ran his fingers over it, frowning. "Clara, does this look familiar to you?" Clara knelt beside him, examining the markings closely. "No, but it's not random. Whoever made this had a purpose." She paused, her brow furrowing. What if this place wasn't always uninhabited? Before Ethan could respond, a loud crash echoed through the air. Both of them froze, their hearts pounding. The sound came again, closer this time. And then, the source revealed itself. A massive creature emerged from the dust storm, its body covered in thick armored plates. Its eyes glowed faintly, and its movements were slow but deliberate. "Back to the cave," Clara shouted, grabbing the sled and pulling it with all her strength. Ethan followed, glancing over his shoulder as the creature lumbered after them. Its roar shook the ground beneath their feet, sending tremors through the rocky terrain. They reached the cave just in time, dragging the sled inside as the creature stopped at the entrance, sniffing the air. It let out another guttural roar before retreating into the storm, leaving the group shaken but unharmed. "What was that thing?" Jake asked, his voice trembling. "I don't know," Clara admitted, wiping sweat from her forehead. "But it's clear we're not alone here." That night, the group huddled closer than ever, their fear palpable. Outside, the wind continued to howl, carrying the sounds of distant roars and shifting rocks. Clara and Ethan stayed awake, taking turns keeping watch while the others tried to rest. "We can't keep living like this," Ethan whispered, his voice barely audible over the noise outside. "Sooner or later, something's going to find us, and it might not be as easy to scare off as that thing." "I know," Clara replied, staring into the fire. But we don't have a choice, not yet. Ethan sighed, leaning back against the cave wall. I just wish I could do more. If anything happens to you guys because of me. Clara cut him off, placing a hand on his arm. This isn't your fault, Ethan. None of us chose to be here. But we did choose to fight, to survive, and we're going to keep fighting no matter what. Her words gave him strength, even if only a little. For now, it was enough. The next morning, Clara announced a bold decision. We're splitting. Up again, she said, addressing the group. Some of us will stay here and finish repairing the shuttle. The rest will head back to the derelict ship to see if there's anything else we can use. We need every advantage we can get. Ethan immediately volunteered to join the second team. You'll need someone who can handle himself out there, he said, meeting Clara's gaze. Besides, I'm not letting you go alone. Clara hesitated but eventually nodded. All right, but be careful. If you run into trouble, don't try to fight it. Just come back. With the teams divided, Clara stayed behind to oversee the repairs while Ethan led the others back to the derelict ship. The journey was tense, every sound making them jump. When they arrived, they split up to cover more ground, searching for anything useful. It was Lily who found it, a hidden compartment tucked away in the ship's cargo bay. Inside was a small device unlike anything they'd seen before. It hummed softly, its surface glowing faintly. What is it? Jake asked, peering over her shoulder. I don't know, Lily admitted, holding it carefully. But it feels important. Ethan took the device from her, studying it closely. Let's take it back to Clara. She'll know what to do with it. When they returned to the cave, Clara's eyes widened at the sight of the device. Where did you find this? She asked, her voice filled with awe. In the derelict ship, Ethan replied. Do you know what it does? Clara shook her head, but her expression was hopeful. Not yet, but it might be exactly what we need. She set to work immediately, connecting the device to her toolkit and running diagnostics. Hours passed and the group watched anxiously as Clara deciphered its functions. Finally, she looked up, her face lit with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. It's a beacon, she said. A distress signal. If we activate it, someone, anyone, might pick it up. But what if it's the Zixians who find us? Jake asked, voicing the question on everyone's mind. It's a risk, Clara admitted. But staying here isn't an option anymore. We're running out of time and our chances of fixing the shuttle in time are slim. This might be our only shot. The group exchanged uneasy glances, but no one argued. They knew Clara was right. As Clara prepared to activate the beacon, Ethan pulled her aside. If this doesn't work, we're done for. It'll work, Clara said firmly, though her hands betrayed her nervousness. It has to. With a deep breath, she pressed the activation button. The device emitted a low hum, growing louder as it sent out its signal. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a faint light appeared on the horizon, a ship descending through the atmosphere. They're coming, Clara whispered, her voice tinged with both hope and dread. The ship landed nearby, and moments later, figures emerged. To everyone's relief, they weren't Zixians. They were human. Rescuers sent to investigate the beacon's signal. As the group boarded the rescue ship, Clara turned to Ethan. We made it, she said, her voice breaking slightly. Yeah, Ethan replied, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. But it wasn't just us, it was all of us. As the ship lifted off, leaving the barren planet behind, Ethan glanced back at the fading landscape. He thought of Ryan, of the Zixians, and of everything they'd been through. It wasn't over. Not completely. But for the first time in months, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they'd found a way home.